I became a mother when I was 18 years old. I had grown up in a Christian household and had loving parents. My childhood was very happy, but during my secondary school years, my parents' marriage ended in a traumatic way. I completely rebelled and stopped caring about anything. I spent my days shoplifting, running away with boys and getting into trouble. I got covered in piercings and tattoos and didn't really care about anything. Abortion was something I'd heard about on TV. It seemed like no big deal. It was just what women did when they had an unplanned pregnancy. When I found myself pregnant at 18, I booked myself in for an abortion, but a part of me was also kind of excited at the thought of having a baby. So when my boyfriend didn't seem to mind what I did, and my parents were supportive about the whole thing, I decided to keep my baby. I absolutely loved being a mother to my little baby boy and took to it naturally. However, when my son was 5 months old, I found myself pregnant again. My midwife had told me that I couldn't get pregnant whilst breastfeeding. Turns out you can. By this point, things weren't going well with my son's dad, and we were splitting up. This time, everyone said that abortion would be the best thing. It took a very long time to get an appointment, and my baby was kicking. I kind of felt an attachment to my baby, but at the same time, I wanted this problem to be over, and I didn't think it would be a big deal. My friends drove me to the clinic, and the traffic made us late for the appointment. I remember thinking I would just keep my baby if we get there too late, but we weren't, so I had the abortion. They told me my baby was 13 weeks, but when I woke up from the procedure, they said they had got it wrong, and it was actually 17 weeks. I was so young and naive that, in all honesty, I just felt completely relieved that my problem, as I saw it, was over. I completely pushed it down as if nothing had happened, but I soon developed a severe anxiety disorder. Looking back, I can see that I had just been through a hugely traumatic event, which would set the course for my future pregnancies. A few years later, I found out I was pregnant again. I was in my mid-20s, single and in a flat with just my son. I loved motherhood but felt lonely. I think I know what it means to be abortion-minded because my mind immediately jumped back to the only solution to this problem that I knew. I simply must just have another abortion. I didn't want to leave it a long time like before, so I hurried up and got myself booked in. Okay. This time, though, it wasn't as easy. The clinic was right next to the maternity ward, and I saw a mother carrying her newborn out to her car. I walked into the clinic reception, hysterically crying. And they rushed me through, telling me they would do the procedure first, as I was upsetting the other woman in the queue. This time I woke up feeling completely empty. I felt the loss of my baby and I went into a very dark place where I could not function properly at all. My self-esteem was really low and I decided to try and remain single and celibate. But after a decade went by, I met someone. Though I was scared, I wanted to really give this a go. He was from my church group and I was a recovering addict. I fell head over heels in love with him. I wanted to wait for marriage, but he couldn't really get his head around the idea and said, how would he know if he wanted to marry me if I didn't sleep with him? Around this time, my dad passed away suddenly, which was a big shock, and I became very depressed, especially as my boyfriend didn't really seem to want marriage after all. But he told me he loved me and had never been more sure of anything in his life. Although I had a copper IUD fitted, I found out I was pregnant again and I was in complete shock. I felt absolutely terrified and didn't want this to be happening, but there was no way I could have another abortion. I very much wanted this baby and was convicted that abortion was wrong. I told some of my friends my news and they congratulated me. My boyfriend put his arms around me and told me it would be okay. We discussed baby names. We both liked the name Nancy for a girl. We looked around a market at cute knitted baby cardigans. But then one day my boyfriend suddenly changed his tune. He said, there's this pill you can take. I said, there's no way I'm going to have another abortion, but he started pleading with me and told me he didn't love me. It all suddenly became like a bad dream. A few days later, we went to the hospital as I had to have the coil removed. I begged my boyfriend, yet again, please don't make me have an abortion. I was brought into a room by myself at the hospital and they asked me what I wanted to do. I told them I'd always wanted to keep my baby, but my boyfriend didn't want me to keep it. I told them that I thought my boyfriend was being coercive. A staff member asked me about the abuse. I shared how I was terrified and I didn't want an abortion, but in my current situation I didn't know what else to do. The staff member told me it was a really brave thing to have an abortion, which made me feel more confused, and that maybe I should have an abortion. The hospital staff told me I'd need to get in contact with BPAS and that it could take weeks. I said I couldn't carry on mentally in this state for weeks. They said they would email my notes through, including a scan they'd taken to help speed things up, but I'd still need to phone. When we got home, I phoned up BPAS in tears. I was booked in quite quickly and my boyfriend took me to the BPAS centre to pick up the pills, pressing me on the way that I had to do this and waiting in the van while I went to get them. When I went inside, I told a nurse that I wasn't sure this was what I should be doing, but she told me it was the right thing for me. It was all very quick and I walked out with the pills, but still thinking in my head, I can't take these. When we got home, my boyfriend begged me to take the pills straight away. I told him I couldn't do it and told him to leave as I was feeling pressured into aborting my baby. After a horrible argument, he left, and that was the last I saw of him for the rest of my pregnancy. The weeks went by with me carrying these pills around everywhere I went in turmoil, trying to decide whether to take them or not. After a while, BPAS called me. I told them I couldn't bring myself to take abortion pills, to which they responded by telling me to come in the next morning and have a surgical abortion instead. Exhausted from the mental struggle and feeling totally defeated, I agreed and was booked in for it the next day. I sat down with a nurse at BPAS and burst into tears as I didn't really want an abortion, but I was also feeling that I couldn't go back. Seeing I was very distressed, the nurse said I could wait a few more weeks or go and speak with a counsellor. I chose the counsellor. The counsellor asked me if I wanted to wait and be booked in again in 3 weeks or take the pill to prepare me for the surgery. I couldn't decide. This wasn't what I had expected from a counselling session, and I felt even more under pressure. At one point, the counsellor told me there's a lady in here who's 16 weeks and she's not making a fuss. She'll be fine and your pregnancy is much less advanced than her. I felt rushed and I felt terrified. The counsellor told me that I needed to hurry up and decide, as there was a waiting room full of women and the doctor would have to go home soon. I reluctantly agreed to have the pill to prepare me for surgery, but still sat there with the pill in one hand thinking I really didn't want to take it. I asked the counsellor if I could see a scan, but she said no because it would only prolong things and make me more emotional. I cried as I put the pill under my tongue, and the counsellor walked off and left me to sit in a waiting room full of other crying women. The pressure was building inside me. I knew this was wrong and I felt utterly terrified. I went to the sink and spat the pill out, telling the nurses I didn't want it and had changed my mind. But by this time the pill had partially dissolved, and as I walked back to where I had been sitting, I could feel some blood begin to trickle down my legs, indicating that the pill had had an effect. When they came to call me for the surgery, I was in tears. They asked what was wrong, and I said I didn't want to do this, but because I was bleeding, I would have no choice now. I said I felt I was doing the wrong thing before God. The nurse told me God wouldn't want another person like your ex in the world. I was given an injection to sedate me, but I was awake for the whole of the abortion procedure, and I cried throughout as I could feel my baby being sucked out of me. They asked if I wanted to take the remains home for cremation or a burial service. I declined. I got home and just couldn't believe what had happened. This decision, made in a moment of pure panic, was one I could never take back. My baby was gone and I felt completely worthless. I had a physical pain in my heart for months that wouldn't go away. I sometimes still get it. I realised this is what heartbreak feels like. I had flashbacks to the smell of the abortion clinic. It followed me around everywhere. I woke up every morning wishing I hadn't, with a deep longing for my baby. A friend suggested getting in touch with the post-abortive ministry, Rachel's Vineyard. I spoke to a lovely lady, Rachel, who reassured me that I was forgiven and that there was hope. I went along to a Rachel's Vineyard retreat and met other men and women who were going through the same thing. It was such a relief to know that there were people who cared and that God does forgive me. I learned about his compassion and divine mercy, which was a side of God I never really knew before. I thought he was always angry with me as I was so undeserving. I know now that I am, but he loves me anyway. They say that abortion is a woman's right and that it is empowering for women to decide whether or not their child inside them lives or dies. This was not my experience. I felt defeated and powerless. Abortion didn't make my problem go away. It just made me the mother of 3 dead children who I've been left to grieve. One night, God gave me a dream about my little girl who I aborted. I decided to call her Nancy, like we had planned if we had a girl. I looked up the meaning of the name and it means grace. I remembered my boyfriend telling me that his family had looked back through their ancestral tree and discovered that one of their ancestors was the hymn writer John Newton, who wrote the hymn Amazing Grace. At the Rachel's Vineyard retreat, we had a memorial service for our babies, and I couldn't believe it when we sang Amazing Grace. And then the priest did a sermon about John Newton. John Newton was a slave owner who found faith in God and became an abolitionist against slavery. In like manner, I stand against abortion in honour of my 3 babies, Levi, Mercy and Nancy Grace.